If nonprofits were brutally honest with funders, a conversation with Vu Le. This was a live discussion that happened on September 30th, 2021 on Clubhouse in the Philanthropy and Giving Club with special guest, nonprofitaf.com rabble-rouser Vu Le, along with our hosts, philanthropy strategist Kris Putnam-Walkerly, CEO of Citizens NYC, Dr. Rahsaan Harris, and marketer for philanthropy, Julie Morris. The session dove into the relationships and power dynamics that have governed the funder-nonprofit relationship. Vu shared the worst of the practices that slow progress and change in this provocative conversation. We explored a more collaborative and healthy dynamic between change-making organizations and philanthropy and what tables we need to flip over to make it happen.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome. Glad to have you. And we already have a great room joining. If you haven't already, folks in the room, you can ping your colleagues to invite them to join the conversation. My name is Kris Putnam-Walkerly. I'm going to open this room up and get us started just even a minute early. On the conversation of if nonprofits were brutally honest, with funders. And, as somebody who advises funders and wrote a book called Delusional Altruism, I can't think of a more perfect person to join us today for a conversation, a more outspoken leader in the field who can talk about delusions that many donors and so I'm super excited for this conversation. And also, I'm really excited to have it on Clubhouse because, in philanthropy, there are so many closed conversations, conferences where it's funders only, meetings where it's funders only, and Clubhouse really offers us an opportunity to open this up to anybody, nonprofit leaders, funders, anyone interested in the topic can join, listen in, hear from a really thought-provoking, rabble-rousing leader, and but also share your own experiences, ask questions, and hopefully collectively we can generate some new ideas of ways that we can improve practices. So I'm going to pass this off to my colleague Rahsaan, who's going to introduce Vu, who will then share, some of his initial thoughts on the topic, and then we're going to open up the room, fairly soon to you, to anyone in the room who has a question, wants to share an experience, or share a suggestion or something that's working well. And so again, if you're new to Clubhouse, the way that you do that is you just click on, there's a little hand icon down at the bottom. And when we start to open the room up, you can just raise your hand using that icon and we'll bring you up on stage and get the conversation going. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to dear Rahsaan.
Thank you, Kris, and huge shout out to Julie Morris, who's also on stage, who done a great job of coordinating and keeping great conversations going. So this is my first time meeting Vu, and Vu is a writer, speaker, vegan, Pisces, and the former executive director of RVC, a nonprofit in Seattle that promotes social justice by developing leaders of color, strengthening organizations led by communities of color, and fostering collaboration between diverse communities. And Vu is all nonprofit AF. I'm censoring myself, but you can figure out what the A and F stand for. And just the boldness that Vu is bringing in the presentation, to a certain extent, can be summed up in this quote that we used in the promo for this room. If COVID taught us anything, is that we don't have a lot of time to waste with these ridiculous shenanigans cloaked as best practices. So, Vu Le, I would love for you to introduce yourself in your terms and, talk about shenanigans and how can we get past them.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Hi, everyone. This is Vu. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish land. I use he, him pronouns. And thank you for having me here. Yeah, I think this is a necessary conversation. And let me just be frank that I'm really tired of stuff right in our sector. I love our sector and I love many of the funders and colleagues that we have. And at the same time, I think in so many ways, philanthropy has been creating the very challenges it's trying to solve. and it's driving many of us to burnout. And I just don't think we have time for it anymore. We are at this inflection point, this sort of existential crisis in our sector, and we got to figure out: are we going to continue with some of this sort of bullshit that we've been dealing with, or are we going to move forward? The most popular blog posts on Nonprofit AF are in the series called "Answers on Grant Proposals If Nonprofits Were Brutally Honest with One Another," and I think it's honest because this is the stuff we've been feeling, but we're, because of the power dynamics, we're just afraid to tell funders, like, no, this is actually really shitty for you to ask for a quarterly report for a $10,000 grant or any amount at all, honestly, right? Or if you have character counts or whatever. But I think it goes way beyond that, and I want us to be honest about some of these philosophies that have been embedded, that are the root causes of many of these terrible practices that we have. For example, like, I think that we don't talk enough about how wealth has been like hoarded, through family foundations, to foundations and corporations avoiding paying taxes. So much of wealth in this country is built on slavery and colonization and other terrible things. And we, as nonprofits, we charity wash and conscience launder for people. And it's because we have these beliefs, like, this is other people's money, they get to do whatever they want with it. It's not your money if you're avoiding paying taxes, or if your money was built on horrible things like slavery and colonization. So it's not your money. So we need to snap out of that. We're going to be honest with funders, right? Like, another thing I want to be honest with funders about is, like, I really really hate this idea that because you have money in society, you get to dictate priorities for the rest of the sector. Like, this is why I can't stand it when funders are like, I'm sorry, you don't align with our priorities. I'm like, who the hell gave you any authority to set any priorities in the first place? Like, you, in many ways, funders, most trustees of foundations are like 95% white, mostly white men. So in many ways, and they are the ones driving so many of the priorities of which issues get tackled in our society. And I'm thinking, you are some of the least informed people in the entire world about these issues. And yet, for some reason, you get to set priorities that the rest of the sector, who are actually on the ground doing this work, have to follow. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it's insulting. So I also, a couple more points before I because I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I think we need to just like get rid of grant applications altogether. I think they are a waste of time. We're wasting hundreds of thousands of hours a year translating the same information from one grant proposal to another, because some funders want it in 500 characters, this answer, or some other ones want it in a haiku format or whatever. It is the same information. They ask the same information, but they want it in their own special little snowflake format. I would like for us all to just have one grant application each, maybe two versions of it, like a short version and a long version, when we don't customize it for anyone. If a funder wants to see what we're doing, we just send them our package. The end. Right? So we need to stop wasting time while the world is burning here. And the other thing I would say is that it's not just foundations that are doing this. It's specifically progressive leaning foundations. There's been studies now, like the Sally Covington report that came out about 25 years ago, that examined the differences between conservative and progressive funders. And what they discovered was that conservative funders just fund just way more openly and with more trust. Kris, I was reading your blog post about, like, you need to fund with speed and trust. Well, that's basically what conservative funders have been doing. Like, we feel really lucky we get a grant for like 2 or 3 years. We're like, oh, look, a multi-year grant. Conservative funders fund for like 20 or 30 years at a time, so that people have the stability to work on stuff and to plan. And we don't have this, and this is why we have been, in many ways, progressives have been way behind. It's because there's just no trust at all. So I feel like we are at, again, this inflection point, this existential crisis in our sector. We have to rethink every single thing. And I want us to just blow shit up, because we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this toxic intellectualizing that we've been doing in this sector around philanthropy. Where we think if we read a white paper or put some sticky dots on the wall or whatever, we just, it's exhausting. I think leaders of color are exhausted by the toxic intellectualizing, that just the constant. I think the joke that people have is that progressives come to a knife fight with a spreadsheet. That's basically what has been happening in philanthropy,
Yo!
and we
So
got to
anyway,
figure out what we're gonna do.
pull to refresh to see my avatar. It's on fire. Vu, you just blew everything up right there. Um, so I really want to take a moment to like take in what you've said. This is really important. I want folks to get questions ready, raise your hand to get ready to come up the stage. What we're going to do is allow a few more minutes of conversation, but love for you to ask Vu and other folks questions. But I wanted to highlight a few things. Bringing a spreadsheet to a knife fight, and just figuring out what are the tactics that are going to allow uh, people who believe and share the same values as you to win versus what are the tactics that are going to keep us in stasis and keep us at the status quo and not move us forward. I think is really what's at stake here. And a lot of great intentions and big time strategic plans happen to good people but end up leading to bad consequences. And Vu, you named it, in particular as being a person of color within the field. And I'm recognizing you, Julie and Kris, as folks that are allies that are on the stage. But in particular, it can have such a detrimental effect on folks of color. When I was in Staten Island, I was talking to a community advocate, and his frustration of how hard it is being a person of color that has a nonprofit that's been able to survive over time. It's the trauma and the resilience you need to survive through all of the shenanigans, the jumping through hoops and justifying your existence because of the power imbalances that are out there in the world, and folks valuing specific ways of communicating but missing over things that are vital for life, um, gets in the way of making rooms inclusive and great work. So thank you for offering it up, and Kris, would love for you to have some comment.
Yes, this is Kris. Thank you so much, Rahsaan. Of course, thank you very much, Vu. I, in particular, wrote down the term blow shit up. I really appreciate that. But yeah, I'm really curious, though. I mean, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Like, have you seen funders that have gone from, negative, horrific, misguided, ineffective, unfair practices that have actually changed and changed for the better? I know, like, I was looking at your Twitter feed again today, and you call out a lot of funders for their bad practices. And I'm just curious, do any of them respond? Are there any examples that you've seen where, funders have taken what you've shared to heart and made changes?
Thanks, Kris. Yeah, I mean, there are funders who do change, right? Who think about what do I need to do. I think there are 800 of them who signed a pledge saying that they will make things easier for us at the beginning of the pandemic. There's some really great people out there, so this is not like a not all funder hashtag not all funders thing, right? There are plenty of good funders. I think it's the whole that we need to talk about. It's like the entire philanthropic sector needs to start thinking about like some significant changes. 800 800 of them signing a pledge saying that they're going to do things better. Okay, that's great, but it's like 800 people signing a pledge that they're going to stop smoking in the wilderness, during a fire. And we're like, okay, that's great, but why were you smoking in the wilderness in the first place? And so like, but that's not the important thing. I think again we get distracted by these little tiny incremental changes where they're like, oh well, we're now going to convert our restricted grant into general operating funds because of COVID, and we're like, yay, that's amazing. It's like us applauding Amazon for giving $100 million to address hunger or something like that. And we're like, you should have just paid your taxes. Like, why are you, and to the foundation, like, why are you doing this now? Like, you should have always been giving general operating funds. That should just be the default. Everyone should just be giving general operating funds, the end. So I don't want us to get so appreciative, because that's one thing in our sector is like everyone has been trained to be appreciative of whatever. And I think it's just gone too far. So yeah, we can definitely appreciate the funders who are changing, but the reality is that most of them are not.
I have a question. So Vu, it's not easy to be an advocate. It's not easy to really be on the side of justice and having uncomfortable conversations with folks. And I feel it's important to find ways to call people in, not just call people out. So, what do you think are some of the most effective ways to call people into this conversation that may or may not currently have the knowledge to know like the impact of their current actions?
Thanks, Rahsaan. I appreciate that point. I would say, there, if you are interested and in getting funders to be more trust based, there is an entire movement called Trust Based Philanthropy. It is making progress. There's some really great foundations like Robert Sterling Clark, Statterberg Foundation, the Women Institute, and others who are driving this movement for funders to be more trust based. And I'm really glad. At the same time, I think there has to be like a balance because calling funders in have not worked in many ways. I was talking to Jan Masaoka from Cal Nonprofit, who is amazing and which is a really brilliant leader in our sector. And she said that in order to move funders, a whole bunch of them at once, there's only two things you can do. Like being nice is not one of those things. It's public shaming and it's legislation. Because for a long time, leaders of color like you and me and others have been asking funders, please do nice, can you please do this? Can you give more than just 8% to people who led nonprofits? You know, can you give more to your general operating fund? Here is 1 billion different studies that show general operating funds is the most effective. You know, we've been asking nicely. We've been trying to call people in for a long time. And it's not to say that we shouldn't continue to do that. But I don't think I'm one of those people anymore. Like I feel like we are putting the feelings of many funders and other people in power over what is actually what our communities need. Like people are literally dying because of COVID. Like I'm not so sure we have so much time to call people in anymore if other people are dying while we wait for to be nice to folks.
I love that urgency of now. It's more than a slogan, it's real. I personally experienced that in particular around the death and the murder of George Floyd. There's definitely a me as a nonprofit leader before that moment, and me as a nonprofit leader after it, because I don't have as many F's to give with COVID and with just all the things that are happening, and everyone's been sat down in this moment of stillness to sit in the pain. And I think there needs to be so much more urgency for folks to get to the right answers. One of the Clubhouse rooms we talked about the Mackenzie Scott money, and my friend Anna Glass, who runs Dance Day of Harlem, came on, and she's talked about the moment when Dance Day of Harlem got their first grant from the Ford Foundation, and I think the American Ballet got their first grant the same year, and literally this is me maybe doing a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. But what Dance Theater Harlem got was a rounding error compared to what American Ballet got. And so I think what certain groups need to go through to justify themselves to get beyond project funding, but to get general operating and get the trust in our leadership that we can make change. It's such a hard barrier, and there are also like psychological and mental health damage that's done when we're not recognized. So, Vu, your sense of being done with it, I think, is needed and necessary to break through. So hopefully, folks can figure out how they can be in unity together, all of us working, as opposed to kind of playing the kabuki theater, not to piss people off, just to get the little bit of crumbs that are falling from the table. That's historically been what we've done. I see two hands that are up. Want to start calling people up to the stage. This conversation is fire. Do not be afraid. Come on up and please introduce yourself and join the conversation. We're not talking. Please put yourself on mute for sound quality. But let's go.
And also, this is Kris. Just a quick reminder. I think, Julie, we are recording the conversation.
Yes,
So
yes, we are.
Wanted to make sure everyone knows that.
Thanks to my friend Lynn's in the audience who's taking care of that for us today. And so, Rahsaan, before we move on to friends, let me just ask this and for y'all. we're looking right now for one organization I'm working with at the amount that is spent in philanthropic money dedicated to economic justice, and just this small percentage. And just as the two of you are sharing, I'm thinking about that kind of similar corollary of how little we give to the things that we say that we care about. And I don't know, I guess just, to your point, Vu, it's like, when will this thing change? And I just want to say that I'm grateful for your frank call outs, and I'm grateful for you, setting the fire and letting us know how critical and urgent this is. So that way, when we stop doing the common grant applications that kept us going through COVID and we go back to business as normal, that we don't stop saying what's wrong here. So, yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Well, Stan, why don't you unmute yourself and share your comment or question? Welcome.
Okay, hey, so I'm a drive-by listener that has very little knowledge in the area of where you are, but I just wanted to share some comments. So I've been trying to help people learn about startups and share information that I've been able to learn through getting to go to good schools and being exposed into the industry, and trying to share and help people learn how to pitch properly, and especially people that of colors and of LBGT and women, to give them the same shot that other people have had in the past. I'm just wondering, and I hear people complain, hey, well, people aren't funding minorities or females at the same degree that others are getting funded. But part of it is because the people making the pitches, the startups, are just now learning how to do it properly. So it's going to take time to improve it. And I'm just wondering, and listening to you guys complain about the funders not paying out enough, could it be more that the pitches and the way you present to the funders aren't at the same level that others are, and that it will take time, but if you spend a lot of time helping educate people how to put the pitches together properly, how to justify it, that you're going to produce better results? Because after all, some of these funders and foundations kind of established their missions many years ago, and they have to stick to
Hey,
that mission.
Stan,
And
that's a
I,
great point. No,
yeah,
I think you bring up a really good point. I think that my friends will probably have some thoughts to share as well, but I will just say that when you underfund capacity along the areas of marketing, of pitching, of technology, of executive training for so many years, and here's where we are. So if we're trying to pull together resources for that, but anyway, I'll just pause and let Kris, Rahsaan.
Yeah, we're not going to do any more pitching, okay? Pitching it falls into this sort of power dynamics where we are begging people for money. Again, if this money is stolen, if someone stole your bicycle, Dan, and they're like, and they're and you're, they're like, you need to pitch to me about why you should get your bicycle back. That makes no sense whatsoever. Again, so much philanthropy has been built on stolen land and enslavement of people. So we're not gonna go and play that game where we have to like beg for some of this money back, right? When people should just be paying taxes in the first place. And we also need to get out of this sort of mentality that we need to be more like businesses. Nonprofits are not startups. We are responding to the gaps left behind by government and by the market forces. If government were doing its job as well, then many of us would not exist. And we should be working so that we are not in existence because government is taking care of its people. So that is just, it's not a comparable at all analogy. And I'm also really frustrated with this because this has been the pervasive philosophy in philanthropy for decades and decades. That is like, no, you just need to do a much better presentation. Work on your elevator pitch, and then we still have these pitch competitions when nonprofits go up on stage and start talking about it, and they get trained on how to give a pretty good presentation, etc. That is just, I find like this Hunger Games approach, and it's completely inequitable because communities that are most affected by systemic injustice should not have to justify getting funding in that way. It is dehumanizing.
I just want to call out Stan. Thank you so much for the courage to ask the question. I want to kind of double down on what Vu said, but maybe say it a tiny bit differently, which is what is correct and who sets the table really decides the power dynamic. You know, if let's say I go to Spain and I'm an English speaker. Unless I say Spain, let me say I'm going to Uruguay. What's correct is speaking Spanish, and I'm speaking English, and I might have just as much to offer. I might really have great ideas, but the language barrier is preventing from us to be in partnership to create good. And I think what we need to do is not colonize the situation where folks need to meet us where we are. I think the human endeavor is really about empathy, so we can each understand each other, because I think those are the innovation and those are the solutions that can endure and make a huge impact. But Tom, Chris, go
Oh
before
no,
Tom
I was
goes.
just going to actually say thank you, and we have a lot of people that want to talk, so I'd love to bring Tom up if you want to unmute yourself and share your question.
Hello from a rainy English night. So even very, very far from Seattle here, the reputation of Voulet as a leader in grant-making reform is very strong, and so it's kind of a real honor to be here. My name is Tom Steinberg. I'm one of the co-authors of a book on grant-making called Modern Grant-Making. And my question to you, Vu, is about the price that you pay personally to be as outspoken as you are about the failings of foundations and philanthropists. I think that part of the reason so many people are here tonight is because you say so many of the things that the rest of us in the field have often felt too afraid to say. So can you maybe talk, if you're willing, about a bit about what it costs you and maybe your family to be the tip of the spear in the way that you are?
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the question and the thoughtfulness around that. I would say it does come with a cost. I have aged a lot, like 20 years or so over the past 10. Uh, and at the same time, I do feel like, like I should not be given like so much of the work that has been done in calling out these practices, these inequitable practices, have been done by so many leaders of color, especially women of color in the past, right? And they are the ones who get way more of the punishment. I know a lot of leaders of color, women of color, who've been punished or who've lost their jobs or have been ostracized because they call out things in the past. I think it is an obligation for those of us who have more privilege to be able to use our privilege to really speak up, because others have been way more punished in the past for speaking up.
Thank you, Vu. Jonathan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, I will put myself back in the audience. I will ask the question, but I'll preface my question with just sharing that I used to be a nonprofit fundraiser for 10 years in Washington, D.C. area. And I had some private conversations with foundation staffers in my early 20s. And they basically told me that the control and power is really managed by ultra rich white people who invest their money into foundations to manage their risk, which is why I left the industry as a whole, because it opened me up to the reality of how philanthropy is by design. So my question is, in regards to this top-down approach and addressing this top-down approach in terms of changing societies and changing communities, is there a way to, rather than reinforcing donors as agenda setters in nonprofits, rather than putting the power into the donors' hands, how can we invite donors into a deeper conversations about the root causes of some of the issues that nonprofits are addressing, such as wealth inequity? And then how do we create accessible inroads for members to identify the best strategies for nonprofits? So that is my question in terms of putting the power in the hands of the donors, but rather than doing that, inviting the donors into a deeper conversation on how to transform societies as nonprofits carry out their vision and mission. This is Jonathan. I'm done speaking. I'm going to place myself back in the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Absolutely. We definitely need to acknowledge that so much of the power in foundations resides within boards who are mostly older white men, wealthy white men. And I know there's the same power dynamics that we have with program officers of foundations is the same dynamics that program officers have with their own boards. And so I think we need to do a much better job just working together with our colleagues at foundations. I know many of them are very stressed out, and they are aligned with us on trying to change philanthropy and foundations, but they are stuck there in the middle because their board members, who again are some of the least informed people in the entire sector, but who are the most powerful, tend to squash and veto everything. And we ourselves, though, we perpetuate this. We reinforce these dynamics because of the way we've been doing fundraising. We've been taught in fundraising that we need to center the comfort of donors and make them feel happy and make them feel like we are appreciative. We are trained to write them handwritten thank you notes and call them and give them the best seats at our galas and everything. And you're right, there that has not been working. It's been entrenching these power dynamics. And now there's a movement that I've been helping to advance called community-centric fundraising that is about grounding fundraising in racial equity and economic justice. And that means, yes, we do need to talk to our donors about where their wealth came from. And it's starting to take root. It's spreading all over. And I think this is what's needed. It's going to be a lot more uncomfortable conversation we need to have. It's not as fun to talk to our donors and tell them, hey, actually, you might just need to pay more taxes. Instead of giving us or in addition to giving us $1,000, you're actually paying less taxes than most lower income people. So you should support these taxes, and also you should maybe consider returning some of the land that your ancestors stole from indigenous communities. Like that is way less fun, but I think this is where we need to go if we're going to realize our potential to create an equitable world.
Boo. So how do you invite someone to a party where you basically say, listen, it's going to be real uncomfortable. It's really probably not going to be fun, but I want you to come to this party. Can you help make the case for why someone should show up? When basically you're coming to this party, and I'm going to rough you up a little bit, but it's for the good of everybody.
Well, thank you, Rahsaan. I think first of all, we've been kind of infantilizing our donors. Let's be honest, and our funders we've been infantilizing them. We think that they're like precious little baby birds who cannot handle these difficult conversations. And I think that many of them actually want to have these conversations, especially during the protest against George Floyd's murder by the police. Like people are waking up and they're like, "Oh shit, white supremacy exists, racism exists, and I have been behind, and I need to find out." So there are ways we can do this. I know one organization in Seattle sent out Ijeoma Uluo's book, "So You Want to Talk About Race," to their major donors and invited them to a conversation about it. And of course, half the donors are like, "What the hell? Why are you?" But others were like, "This is amazing. No one's invited us to this conversation before." I was talking to a major donor of mine, and he said, "Vu, I'm really tired of getting these handwritten thank you notes. They're great and blah blah, but they're all the same." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what would you like?" This is a white man. And he said, "Well, I hear that you're attending this 2-day training on undoing institutional racism. Like, can I attend with you?" And I said, "Yeah, if you can pay for your ticket, absolutely, come with us." And he attended both days of it, both days on talking about racism and white wealth and power and all of this stuff. And of course, it was the most uncomfortable 2 days for a lot of people. There was a lot of crying. Um, and at the end of it, I checked in with him, and he was like, "That was really great. I really appreciate being invited to this." So I think we need to stop infantilizing our donors. We need to stop treating them like toddlers. We keep saying things like, "Let's not treat our donors like ATM machines," but the reality is, we do. We treat our ATM. We're just very nice to our ATM machines. We defer to our ATM machines, and that is not an equal partnership.
Amazing. Yvonne, my dear friend, please ask Will a question. Your audio's not coming through. I don't know if it's just.
If it doesn't work, Yvonne, you may need to step out of the room and then re-enter right away.
Well, in the meantime, this is Kris. I just wanted to reset the room. So we are here having a conversation about if nonprofits were brutally honest with funders or ourselves. And so this has been a fabulous conversation. We're really excited to have it and hear from a wide variety of perspectives. And if you haven't already had a chance to talk, please, and you want to say something or ask a question or share your experience, please raise your hand and we will hear from you. So Yvonne, welcome.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, that was so weird. Thank you. So, Vu, it's always a pleasure. And I'll be honest, I don't really have a question, but I do have a kind of a call to action to the donors in the room. But first, I had to just, and Rahsaan and Vu, I actually appreciate you both speaking to Stan's comments and Stan with respect as a woman of color who's working on women of color work. There are women of color who have been in the finance industry for decades, and yet we are still constantly asked question after question after question during our pitch. So, what you have to understand is that we know how to pitch, but folks don't know how to respond to us. We are not asking for anything more than the standard that you give white men when it comes to investing in us. But for some reason, they think we are asking for more. So just, and if I misunderstood anything you said, Kris and Rahsaan, please, please correct me. So, I just wanted to say to the other donors in the room, sometimes people tell me, oh, Vaughn, you always ask the question when I'm in a room full of colleagues, donor colleagues, you always ask the question that nobody else wants to answer. And at first I thought it was cute, but it's not cute any longer. And I think for those of us who are in either working in, foundations or working with donors, it's beyond time to stop sitting comfortably in our house and not calling each other out, right? We have a responsibility to tell each other the truth. And I just want to ask those of you who are in the room, because I know there are donors in the room. I look through the feed, and if we can just display it like at least some of the courage that our grantee partners do, I think it would go a long way. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And the thing too is, privilege is such a thing that different people can have it on different dimensions. And we definitely call out, white supremacy and male patriarchy and even like, heterosexual like privilege. But there are a lot of different ways that folks can have privilege. So all of us can do some self-examination. But being real is that there are some privilege dimensions that are very prominent, and you can just do the phenotype, look at the room, smell test, look at someone's website and see who's on their board, and it'll let you know kind of what's the prevailing dominance. And I think acknowledging it and trying to have conversations about it so that we can move the work forward is so important. Vu, any comments before we get to Peter?
No, I'm good.
Hey, Peter, make sure you unmute yourself, and we'd love to have you share your thoughts, comments, questions, if you're there. Maybe you've left. You've been up on the stage for a while.
Well, we can move to Mercedes and get Peter back if Peter comes back. Mercedes.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Vu. This is the first time I haven't heard of you. Now I'm following you. But I just wanted to share some thoughts about the organization I work for, which is a performing arts theater. And in the theater sector, there is a huge reckoning. Everyone in our theater sector knows that staff members are calling out inequities, board members are calling out inequities, directors are calling out inequities all over the map, even on the visual arts side. A few years back, before the George Floyd situation, the theater I worked for said that we were going to be an anti-racist organization. We already started the work diversifying our staff internally, but the George Floyd incident and everything that happened last year ramped our work up. And our industry had a cohort that pretty much called all of our American white theaters to task and pretty much said, like, look, this is the 13-page document that's going to tell you what all the inequities we are seeing, as an industry, and this is what you need to change, including funding and funders and how we get funding and who gets chosen. For my institution, we look at our board. Our board knows that they have to do EDI training. Our board staff knows we have to do EDI training. We do that monthly. Anyone who's a funder of ours knows the work we're doing internally. Everyone knows that if they're looking at us and they want to be our board, they're going to have to do the work. We're not sugarcoating our conversations internally at all. And people are uncomfortable. But because they care about the mission and maybe sometimes they care about that tax break that they're going to get every year, they're still sticking around. And as far as grants is concerned, we're cherry picking and really looking at where we're getting our money from, who we're choosing to apply to for asking for funds. It's something that makes us uncomfortable because, of course, there's just certain grants we have to go after. But at least we're having those conversations as to, should we go after this? Is there an alternative foundation we should choose instead? These are conversations that are probably, the change really is probably going to happen from the bottom going upward. I want to just express. And also, in my own personal opinion, I'm a huge proponent of individual giving for this reason, because at least you can vet the individual donors and know their background and get to know them on a personal level to guide you and kind of fund the mission. It's more of a deeper relationship that way. This is Mercedes, and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Peter, go right ahead. You have a question for Vu?
No, I have comments to make though. So I'm coming at this completely differently than you are, Vu, and I am passionate about helping nonprofits get capacity support and operational support because I believe that's what's going to enable nonprofits to be able to produce a lot more over time. And my approach toward it is completely different. I'm putting together stories of impact where it's happened. I don't believe that shaming is going to get you where you want to go. I don't believe your anger is going to get you where you want to go. And the only thing I can say is we can look back maybe a year or two down the line and let's measure impact, see whether you've gotten where you wanted on your approach, and let's see where I've gotten on my approach. My website is going to be in a couple of weeks, fuelnonprofits.org. I'm going to show stories where people have provided funding, what it's done. I'm going to try to inspire funders to realize, because I don't believe a lot of funders realize the power that they can achieve through that kind of approach. And I'm also wanted to say that I just got done with a 3-day, I am a funder. I just got done with a 3-day workshop with a lot of other wealthy funders, and we were talking about power dynamics, and we were talking about trust-based philanthropy. And I see a lot of people who are taking it very seriously. But if they were being shamed, they would never even join the conversation.
Peter,
So I'm done.
Peter, thank you for that. And I want to leave you on sit for a tiny bit because just I want Vu to maybe say something to it, and if you wanted to respond. But Vu, it kind of goes into what I was kind of asking before, because some folks feel like we're such a divided country, and this is just more divisiveness. And how can we ever come together if we have this approach? Like Vu, like how would you respond to that?
Well, thank you for your perspective, Peter. I think if you have the patience to go and be really nice and handhold people, then absolutely. I think you should. I'm not going to stop you, right? I think it's necessary. I think the approaches are necessary. I would like to say, though, from my perspective, and anyone can disagree with me, is that people of color like me, we're tired of trying to be nice. It actually hasn't worked. We don't need to wait 2 years to look back. We can look back at the last 20 or 30 years. 90% of funding has been going to white-led organizations. Like 2.5% goes to black-led organizations. Like less than half a percentage point go to native-led organization. And we bring this up all the time. And we have summits and we have meetings. And has it changed? No, it hasn't. I have been plenty nice. And I think that we need to talk about this sort of white moderation that has been has such a hold on our sector. the white moderate is what Dr. King said was the biggest barrier towards justice. From in his letter from Birmingham jail, he wrote about how the biggest barriers to justice are not the people burning crosses and marching and wearing hoods. It's the white moderate standing on the side saying, I really appreciate your goals, but can you be a little bit nicer about it? Can you be, can you invite people in? Can you not cuss so much? And our sector has become one giant white moderate. And philanthropy has been the biggest embodiment of the white moderate ever. When we are focused on niceness and respectability over justice, we have been asking for a long time nicely for philanthropy to change, for donors to change, to give more money to POC-led organizations, to Black-led organizations. We've asked nicely for some of these shitty grant-making practices, and now people are like, "Oh, Vu, you're so angry. Why can't you have?" I have been nice. If you notice on my blog, there's lots of pictures of baby animals, and I use lots of humor because I've been trying to invite people in. But I think now, with the police still killing Black people, and the fact that our climate has 8 more years before it's completely irreversible because of climate change, we don't have time to be nice, right? Niceness is a luxury for the privileged, and if any of us have the energy to be nice, then absolutely, I'm not going to prevent you from being nice. But we also now need to move towards legislation. This is why, like the ACE Act, the Accelerate Charitable Efforts Act, right now, a lot of philanthropy is opposing it. All it is like a mild set of reforms, and it's still being opposed. But I think that people have had enough of it, and we're gonna see more legislation on philanthropy now because asking nicely has not been as effective as we were hoping for.
Can I just say one thing? And I'm not going to try to dominate because I'm a guest, not a speaker. I think there's another thing besides being nice. People need to know, the funders need to know your pain. They need to know how hard they really need to get it, and if they don't. Part of what I'm hoping to do with my website will be to be able to share some of your stories so people can feel it, because until they feel it, they're not going to change.
Peter, thank you so much for your comments. Vu, I don't know if you had any more to say to that, but it's so interesting to me because that's what kind of felt like the George Floyd moment for me, right? All of this pain that I've been feeling for so many tragedies that have happened. Abdul Lamima, so many folks, Sean Bell, like all of these people that have been gunned down. And then finally, you have this one moment where everyone sat down because of the pandemic and to sit with it. And then folks kind of understood the pain. But the question is, who bears the brunt of like being patient and waiting for that moment and to break through? And so, Peter, thank you for that perspective. But yeah, and also Vu, thank you for like that fierce urgency, like that righteous indignation. I think is pushes people beyond their comfort and the status quo. Alex.
Hey, thanks everyone. Thanks for holding this space, and Vu, I just appreciate your leadership. I want to live in a world where we just give and we don't expect anything in return. And maybe that's bad or not realistic, or maybe I'm just imagining something that's not possible, but the impact reports that we have to fill out, the constant follow-up, the constant like kissing of the ring, so to speak, of the donors, it's really laborious. And yeah, I just feel like this purchasing of something that the donor is constantly feeling isn't really philanthropic. Being a human being is about giving and expecting nothing in return. That's our greatest value. That's when I feel the most human. But I appreciate the conversation, and just thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate that comment and perspective. Vu, did you have anything you wanted to say in response?
No, I appreciate Alex. I feel like our sector has trained all of us to be extremely grateful to donors and to treat them like heroes and everything. And, we have phrases, we have things like, you can never thank someone too much. I really do think we can thank someone too much, and we have been. to the point where we've created entitled donors who believe that they are doing this because their ego is being uplifted. And I think we're going to move away from that.
So this is Kris. Again, we have at least 10 more minutes, 12 more minutes or more for this conversation. So I would love for anyone else who has an experience. I know there's a lot of nonprofit leaders in the room, many funders in the room. If you haven't had a chance to talk already and share your thoughts, then please raise your hand. And we would like to hear your perspective. I do want to say, though, I have a question, Vu. I mean, a couple thoughts. I'm really appreciative of what you're saying, and I appreciate the urgency. And I'm just curious, I guess, two sort of related thoughts. One is, or questions. One is, what, like, very specifically, like, what changes would you like to see in philanthropy? You mentioned, like, practically speaking, eliminating applications, or making, like, literally one proposal, one application that everyone fills out. But what other changes would you, and you also are advocating for the legislation to change, add more restrictions, I guess, or more expectations and more transparency to donor advised funds. But what other changes would you recommend making sector-wide or field-wide? And then I'm curious, you mentioned the trust-based philanthropy sort of movement, which I find the whole movement very curious, because I feel like, I mean, on one hand, it's cool, like funders are trying to be more trust-based and more trusting, but like, it shouldn't be that hard. You know what I mean? Like, why should having trusting relationships be all that complicated? Why does it require webinars and a movement and a framework? And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that also.
Thanks, Kris. Honestly, there's already a roadmap for what philanthropy needs to do to be effective. And it is basically progressive foundations need to do exactly what conservative foundations have been doing so well. So like all funding should be general operating. It should be like 10 years at a minimum so people can actually plan. It needs to target communities that are most affected by systemic injustice. And funders need to like get out of the way and stop determining policies and strategies. Strategic philanthropy has been one of the worst things that's been inflicted on our sector. And the proponents of strategic philanthropy, this concept of strategic philanthropy, have been writing apology letters and publishing them in the Chronicle and other places for this damaging philosophy that they've unleashed on the sector, that funders, who again are often the least informed people about these issues, should be driving them. Right. So we need to just like really, I think that's one thing conservatives do is like, okay, we trust you to handle this issue. We're just going to fund you and let you take the lead on that. So, so that's what we should be doing. Another thing is that we should be focusing on these bigger, more important things. I can't believe how much time and energy is being spent micromanaging nonprofits when right now, for example, we have like voting being suppressed everywhere. And we have ridiculous tax laws where rich people are not paying their fair share of taxes. So these are things that we need to focus on as a sector. Philanthropy should be focusing like, like let's prevent voter suppression. What are we doing about that? But instead we're just out there just kind of not trusting one another. I do think that like the trust-based philanthropy is great, and I think I fully support that movement. There needs to be more trust. And yes, I agree with you, Kris. Like, why do we even need this movement in the first place? Conservative foundations naturally trust, and this is why they've been making such progress over the past several decades. We don't have that. We treat philanthropy and progressive leaning philanthropy treats nonprofits the way that we treat poor people. It's like, we want to help you, so here's some money, for food, for your food, but you can't spend it on certain things because we don't really trust you. And I think we need to acknowledge, like, I think someone brought it up, which is that we have self-interest that we do not talk about. We have these personal conflicts of interest. I remember talking to a room full of funders once 2 years ago, and I said, we've been saying these things for a long time nicely, and nothing has changed. What is going on? And the room was quiet until one program officer raised her hand and said, we have to acknowledge that we get paid really well, and we get really good benefits. And how do we rock a boat? If we could fall right out the boat, we could lose our jobs. And I think this is something that all of us need to acknowledge. But those of us with more privilege, like funders, like CEOs and board members, have to be even more cognizant of it. Is that we our livelihoods depend on the existence of inequity. We need it to exist so that we can get paid to fight it. If that's the case, then it makes it very difficult for us. If we don't acknowledge it, then it's going to be hard for us to mitigate the damages that we do. So I think that the lack of trust is because we have been trying to preserve our own livelihood and pay our mortgages and stuff. But as we move forward out of this pandemic, we got to figure out, what do we need to do about this?
Boo, I just wanted to say that is so true, and it's been true across generations. You think back to the civil rights movement, and a lot of like middle class, blue collar, black workers, when they were asked to do the bus boycott, like folks were putting their lives and their livelihoods on the line for this idea of justice. And what you're willing to put on the line for change is a really big question that we all need to ask ourselves. Alexandra.
Hi all. I actually joined Clubhouse for this conversation, so please forgive me if I'm not doing this right. But I am here in a personal capacity, but I work with a funding intermediary. And I was just wondering, are there any recommendations that you'd give a funding intermediary who doesn't always have the same decision-making power as a funder directly? How can we help support nonprofits to remove some of the emotional labor you mentioned? Um, we do this as much as humanly possible in my organization by connecting funder to grassroots orgs after an initial context setting conversation, recommending multi-year general support funding. But I'm always seeking to learn. So what else would you recommend that we do?
Thanks, Alexandra. If you go to Nonprofit AF, I wrote a blog, and it's called the Equitable Grant Making Continuum, and it lists out all the sort of equitable practices that we would like. And this was compiled from talking to a whole bunch of organizations led by communities of color. And there are certain things that you can do. Some funders, for example, do not fund fiscally sponsored organizations. And we know a lot of fiscally sponsored organizations are led by communities of color or disabled people, et cetera. And yet many funders won't fund them because they're fiscally sponsored. So there are things that you can do. You can check out that continuum, and it's a good checklist for what you should be doing. I do think that sort of you have more power as an intermediary to talk to other funders, because you can say, we talk to these 40 organizations in our alliance, or who are our grantees, and they say that quarterly reports is ridiculous and not helpful at all. I think that we need to do a much better job, and intermediate organizations have a significant amount of responsibility, as well as the trust to actually get through to funders, whereas many of us as individual organizations cannot.
I wanted to add, Alexandra, Citizens Committee makes micro grants across New York City. So in any given year, like in 2020, we had 402 grantee partners, and collecting funds from all of those different funders, as we make the pitch to raise the money to give out the, over $1 million that we gave out across those organizations. That communication is a chance to educate and really make it value laden, and also try to help to identify what impact is, because as you educate donors, what to expect and and to look for, and try to hopefully create platforms for all the different grantee partners to have a voice and hopefully be at the table as opposed to be on the menu. That's just critically important. So I think intermediaries can lead the charge in education, and hopefully use that platform and their space as connector for those purposes. We have approximately 3 minutes left officially in this room. Wanted to just really thank everyone for their thoughtfulness, for bringing their true, authentic selves to this conversation. Hopefully, leading with love, but also accepting messages that might have been different from what they started with, but recognizing hopefully that we're all working towards like a more just, sustainable, and equitable world. Wanted to give Julie and Kris a chance to ask Vu any more questions. Vu, if you have any wrap-up statements and to see how we're going to close this room out soon.
Hey everyone, I want to say thank you. I know that was a lot. I have small children, and I have not been sleeping a lot during this pandemic, and it probably comes through. But the reality is that I do love our sector, and I have lots of amazing friends who are funders who work for foundations. I'm not frustrated and angry at individuals necessarily, but as institutions, philanthropy has to change. Everything is on fire. We do not have time for the same sort of shenanigans we've been dealing with anymore, and it's time for us to get to really build power and to really start thinking about what we need to do, because the people who cannot be here, the people that we serve, the people who don't have the voices or the microphones that we do, they rely on us to be effective at our job. And for so long, our job effectiveness has been affected by all of these ineffective practices that's been perpetuated by philanthropy. We don't have time. Our communities do not have time for it anymore. We need to embrace our power and make change happen.
Vu, thank you so much for all that you shared, and more importantly, thank you for all that you do, for standing up, for speaking out, for being so vocal and brutally honest, and calling people out and calling out what the changes that are really needed, and taking the risks and losing the sleep and doing what you do. Truly, it's really valuable and really appreciated by all of us, myself, Rahsaan, Julie, and so many people in this room. So thank you. And I want to ask you, what, if anything, can we all do to support you? Like, how could we be helpful to the work that you're doing?
Thanks, Kris. Please go and check out communitycentricfundraising.org. It's a movement to change the way that we do fundraising. Check out trustbasedphilanthropy.org as well. And check out nonprofitaf.com. There's lots of pictures of baby animals there.
Amazing. If you loved this conversation, or even if it made you a little bit uncomfortable, it means that you need to follow this club. So go to the greenhouse that is above the title, click on it, follow the club. You get notifications for the conversations that are coming up, and follow the folks in the room, because together we can get this work done. Together we can come with solutions and make the innovations that's going to make this world a better place. I want to thank Julie, Kris, and definitely Vu. And hopefully we'll see you soon, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.